Mike, you think about the Ten Commandments. When we think about the Ten Commandments, I think a lot of Christians are familiar with, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't steal. But the second commandment is not one that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. You shall not make a graven image or any likeness of anything in all of creation. We got a call about that I want us to listen into.
Hey, Mike and Adriel. Really love the show. Thank you so much for all the encouraging words you give. My question is about the second commandment. I know the second commandment forbids the making and the worshiping of graven images, which includes images of God. But would this include not making any images of the humanity of Jesus? And are there any nuances to that? I would have to think that the incarnation of Christ at least casts this commandment into a somewhat different light, since the human nature of Christ was visible in human history. I assume if Peter or John or James ever reminisced about what Jesus looked like, they weren't breaking the second commandment because they had a visual representation of Christ in their mind. So can we ever visually represent the humanity of Christ in any way? For instance, you might see Christian artwork of a sandaled foot on a dusty road, and we're supposed to think of that as the foot of Jesus, or a silhouette of a man in a distant boat in the Sea of Galilee, and we're supposed to think of that as Jesus. Are these legitimate and ethical uses of artistic talent? Or even full body images, whether it be paintings or nativity figurines or even passion plays or in Hollywood films.
Yeah.
Are there any ethical or even practical questions of wisdom that we should keep in mind?
Woo, man. Yeah, this is a tough one. Practically speaking, I don't think that the answer is difficult, but it really would change, I think, a lot of things in our church life if we took the second commandment seriously. First of all, just to sort of set it up a little bit here, the early church didn't allow any images of Jesus, of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the first to use images of Jesus were the Gnostics. In fact, the early church fathers said, well, it's the Gnostics who have the pictures. We tear them down. We destroy them whenever we see them. All the way to, St. Augustine said that no church that has any images or pictures of Jesus is anything but a pagan temple. I mean, that is pretty serious. Then you get a turnaround. In the 6th century, you have a council that basically turns its back on all of the earlier councils and says, no, actually, because God the Son became incarnate, we can represent his humanity. So exactly the argument that you're mentioning there, here's how we have to think about this. And I'm going to it's a little longer because I think we have to give it attention. First, we have to ask, who is Jesus? One person in two natures, God and man. That's what the scriptures tell us. One person in two natures. He is God and man. So there are two heresies we have to avoid. Either confusing the natures or separating the natures. Okay? If we confuse the natures, that's called monophysitism, one-naturism. And if we separate the two natures, it's called Nestorianism, after Nestorius, a presbyter, a minister who was arguing for something like this. An example of a Nestorian separation of natures is the refusal to say that Mary is the mother of God. This is what kind of kicked off the controversy. And Nestorius and his followers said, no, you can't say Mary is the mother of God. Mary's the mother of Jesus. Well, the Orthodox came back and said, if Mary isn't the mother of God, then who's she the mother of? Who is Jesus if not God? Now, of course, the eternal Son didn't come first to exist by being conceived in Mary's womb. He was eternal. But the one she conceived was the eternal Son who became incarnate. So it would also be Nestorian then to say that we could represent the human nature of Jesus, but not his divinity. Because who is Jesus? He is God. If you can represent the humanity of Jesus apart from his divinity, then you're a Nestorian. That is a heresy. You only have one person here. So to represent him at all is to represent him as he is, both divine and human. Second, we just don't have any description of any details concerning what Jesus looked like. So it's always going to be a figment of somebody's imagination, including a movie based on the New Testament. Why don't we have any description of what Jesus looked like? Well, all we know is John 20, verse 31. At the end of his gospel, John says, "These things were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and believing in him have life eternal." So we didn't need a picture of Jesus. It's not germane to the story, the plot line of what God has accomplished for our salvation in Jesus Christ, that we have a picture of him. Isn't it amazing? That's where we always go, Adriel. We always go to picture of Jesus. And what was his favorite ice cream? And what was... The point of the Gospels is, here's what he did.
Yeah.
Here's who he is.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, 1 John, for example, where John is writing and he talks about the fact that we've seen him, we've heard him, we've handled him, all of these things. He didn't say we've
and
drawn
you will
some
too.
We've drawn some good pictures for you to remember. He says, this is what we're proclaiming to you, what we're preaching to you.
Faith comes by hearing the word of Christ.
That's right. And even Paul, when he talks about placarding Christ before the church, before the Galatians.
Visual image, but...
it's through preaching.
Yeah.
It's so the way in which we give people a quote-unquote picture of Jesus, it's through the word proclaimed, the gospel preached. Yeah. And Jesus does give us some images in the New Testament, right? We would say that baptism and the Lord's Supper are the images that Christ gives
his
to us.
icons.
Yeah.
I think, too, of what happened in the Old Testament, the golden calf, obviously, but also the bronze serpent. Here you didn't have something that was evil. You didn't have a violation of the second commandment, making a graven image. Rather, you had God himself commanding Moses to make a pole and to put a snake on top of it, representing not Jesus or God the Father or the Holy Spirit, but representing the salvation that he was going to provide in Jesus Christ. And that bronze serpent, guess what? Ended up being worshipped by the Israelites. They were burning incense to it when Hezekiah destroyed the bronze pole and the serpent on top. 2 Kings 18:4. He utterly destroyed it in his great Reformation. And that's just our tendency. Isn't it amazing? God gives them a wonderful sign they can rely on. Look to this and you will be saved from all these serpents. And a few centuries later, their descendants are bowing down and worshiping the pole instead of God. That's where we go. We can't have... The medieval church said, well, we don't worship the images, the statues. We venerate them. And as the Reformers said, try to find one person who knows that difference in Christendom. Everybody's bowing down and worshiping these statues. That is how we are. Our minds are our idol factories. So we need to not have these temptations at all. The second commandment forbids the making, not just the worshiping or venerating, but the making of these images. We worship Jesus. John 20, verse 28, Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." We worship Jesus, but we don't worship a representation of Jesus. We worship Jesus as he really does come to us. What does Paul say in Romans 10? He's not far off. He is as near as the word that we are proclaiming right now, the gospel of Jesus Christ.